Just beat it.
I didn't realize this was a class game.
Remember those forgotten school things from the 1970s? The ones we all miss more than we ever said out loud? Back then, they shaped our routines, friendships, and sense of belonging. When did something so ordinary start to quietly disappear from our lives? Let's talk about something that smelled like a classroom and probably still lives rent-free in your memory. Mimeograph handouts. If you were a school kid in the 1970s, you knew that deep purple ink on that soft, damp sheet meant one thing. You were about to do some real work. But before that, you probably took a deep inhale of that weirdly satisfying chemical scent. You know the one. The mimeograph machine was like the unholy cousin of a copy machine, and it sat in some locked room where only teachers dared go. These pages were always a little crooked, maybe smudged, but you didn't care. They were yours. You got to flip through them, doodle in the margins, and sometimes even finish your work early just so you could sniff it again. Teachers used them for quizzes, word searches, permission slips, and every once in a while, a coloring page that had been copied so many times it looked haunted. In a weird way, mimeograph paper felt like a rite of passage. That moment when your teacher passed the stack down your row and said, "Take one and pass it back," that was the stuff of legend. We did not know it back then, but these purple-stained sheets were little time capsules, packed with bad spelling, grainy graphics, and that unforgettable scent of school days gone by. Before insulated bags and bendy ice packs, you had a metal lunchbox, and it said everything about you. In the 1970s, a lunchbox was more than a container. It was a bold, clunky rectangle of personality. Scooby-Doo? The $6 Million Man? Maybe Wonder Woman if you were one of the cool ones. And inside that heavy metal case was a matching thermos that clicked shut and could keep soup warm or spill milk everywhere depending on the day. Your mom might have packed you a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in wax paper, a bag of pretzels, and an apple so bruised it looked like it had seen combat. And that was lunch. But that box, oh, it took a beating. It rolled down staircases, got sat on, slammed into lockers, and was sometimes used as a substitute football. By the time you made it to spring, the paint was chipped, the character's face was half scratched off, and the thermos smelled permanently like tomato soup. But you kept it. Every lunch period was a lineup of pop culture on the cafeteria table, and heaven help the kid who showed up with just a brown bag. That was social exile. Those metal lunchboxes were noisy, dented, and always too small. But they carried our childhoods inside them, one squashed sandwich at a time. You knew it was going to be a good day when the lights went out and the film strip projector came out. That low whir, the faint hum, and the little beep that told the teacher it was time to click to the next slide. Beep, click, and again, beep, click. In the 1970s, these things were everywhere in schools. Educational videos were not on YouTube. They were printed on transparent frames and wound into a reel like some old Hollywood mystery. The narrator always sounded like he was reading out of a phone book, and the animations were, well, let's just say, budget-friendly. But you still loved every second, because it meant no notes, no tests, just sitting back and hoping the teacher forgot the lights were off. Every class had that one projector that only half worked. The lens was always dusty. The bulb would burn out mid-lesson. Sometimes it was backwards or upside down. But you watched anyway. Whether it was about how plants grow, the water cycle, or some animated duck teaching math, the film strip was a golden break from routine. It turned classrooms into tiny theaters. It turned teachers into projectionists. And it turned students into slack-jawed kids staring at a flickering wall, completely content. Now this was elite. If you had one of the early Trapper Keepers in the 1970s, you were operating on a different level. Forget loose folders or rubber bands. The Trapper Keeper was the Cadillac of school supplies. It clicked shut with that unmistakable Velcro sound, opened like a command center, and held every paper, worksheet, and secret note you owned. Some had rainbow gradients, some had race cars, Others had geometric chaos that looked straight out of a disco. The binder rings snapped into place with authority. You had folders labeled for every class, and you felt like you had your life together, even if you definitely did not. Teachers both loved and hated them. Loved the organization, hated the distractions. Because, let's be honest, you spent more time decorating it with stickers and doodling hearts on the inside than actually using it. Still, there was something empowering about clicking that cover shut and slamming it on your desk. Like you were saying, yeah, I am ready to learn. Even if you just spent the whole class playing MASH in the margins. Trapper Keepers were not just stationery, they were identity. They told people who you were, or at least who you wanted to be. This one hits hard. Storytime with a record player was a full event in the 1970s classroom. The lights would dim just a little, the teacher would carefully place a giant vinyl record on the turntable, and you would hear that faint crackle as the needle dropped. The voice would come in, calm and theatrical. When you hear the chime, turn the page. That chime? Magic. Goosebumps every time. These stories were not just being told, they were being performed, with background music, sound effects, and perfect pacing. The class would sit in a soft silence, some kids closing their eyes, others watching the teacher turn the pages of the giant picture book up front. You might not have remembered the story itself, but you remembered how it made you feel. Safe, still, completely there. The record player would sometimes skip or drag, but that just made it more real. It was tactile, it was shared, and it beat spelling tests any day of the week. Story records were the lullaby of the school day, a rare, slow moment where the classroom felt more like home. The overhead projector was the crown jewel of classroom technology in the 1970s. It looked like a weird lamp from the future, but when the teacher rolled it in, you knew things were about to get serious. The clear transparency sheets, sometimes handwritten, sometimes printed, would be carefully laid on the glass. The light would shine up through it, reflect off the angled mirror, and bam! The wall turned into a giant worksheet. Teachers would use dry erase markers to underline, circle, and emphasize things like they were news anchors on live television. Sometimes they wrote too fast, sometimes they forgot to erase, and every once in a while, they'd block the light with their hand and accidentally cast a giant shadow that looked like a puppet show across the whiteboard. You always paid closer attention when the overhead came out, not because it was more interesting, but because it felt more official, like you were about to be hit with a pop quiz or a grammar rule that would follow you for the rest of your life. You could see the handwriting projected huge, right on the board. It was hard to ignore, hard to escape, but somehow you still kind of loved it. Chalkboards ruled the classroom in the 1970s. Not whiteboards, not smart screens, just a slab of green or black slate and a bucket of chalk that turned every lesson into a dust storm. The teacher would scribble notes with a screech so high-pitched it could wake the dead. Then came the erasing. Back and forth with that felt block, raising clouds of fine white dust that hung in the air like fog. Sometimes they had these big rolling erasers with handles. Sometimes it was just whatever piece of cloth looked clean enough. Kids would fight over who got to clap the erasers outside, banging them together like little chalk-covered gladiators. You came back wheezing, but proud. The chalk would get under your fingernails, on your pants, in your lungs. But nobody cared. It was part of the deal. And there was nothing more thrilling than sneaking to the board during lunch to draw something goofy before the teacher walked in. Chalkboards were messy, loud, imperfect, and totally essential. They were the backdrop of every pop quiz, diagram, and last-minute lesson. And we missed that clatter and dust more than we ever thought we would. Every classroom had one. That long strip of letters running above the chalkboard showing the perfect way to write in cursive. Capital A to lowercase z with loops, tails, and curves so smooth they looked like art. In the 1970s, cursive was serious business. You practiced it every day, filled entire notebooks with drills, and had to learn how to connect letters like it was a secret code. Teachers would walk down the aisles, checking your loops, making sure your capital Q did not look like a number 2. And let us not even talk about how brutal lowercase z was. That chart above the board stared you down every class, like, yes, I am elegant. You try harder. It was both inspiration and pressure. You tried to copy those curves exactly. Maybe you got close. Maybe your handwriting looked like spaghetti. Either way, cursive class was its own kind of rite of passage. Everyone had a different style, but the goal was always the same. Write like a grown-up. Write like someone who meant business. And even if you forgot how to do it today, you still remember the feel of your pencil dragging across the page in slow, careful loops. Mounted on the wall like some kind of sacred artifact, the hand crank pencil sharpener was a school day ritual. Your pencil would get dull, maybe during math, maybe in the middle of a spelling test, and you would take the long walk to the front or back of the room to sharpen it. Every eye on you. You turned the crank slowly at first, then faster. The loud grinding noise filled the whole room like a blender eating gravel. You pulled your pencil out, checked the tip, maybe cranked again. Sometimes the lead snapped right after, sometimes it came out perfect. You never really knew. There was always a little pile of shavings inside the machine. And if you were unlucky, you got the job of cleaning it out, dusty fingers and all. It was loud, it was clunky, but it worked. And there was something satisfying about it, like a small victory before diving back into your multiplication tables. That sharpener was your lifeline. A weird little break in the day, a chance to move, breathe, and reset, if only for a moment. Getting one of these was like winning the lottery. Funky reward stickers in the 1970s were bright, goofy, and smelled like synthetic heaven. Scratch and sniff? That was next level. Your teacher would slap one on your paper if you nailed a quiz or finally stopped talking during spelling. Gold stars, smiley faces, anthropomorphic apples giving thumbs up. Whatever the design, it meant you were seen. You did something right. Sometimes you would stick them on your desk, or your trapper keeper, or just keep them in a little sticker album, waiting for the perfect spot. You might even trade them like baseball cards during recess. Some kids collected them obsessively, comparing who had which cents or the rare holographic ones that shimmered under fluorescent lights. Teachers kept them in a little drawer like treasure. You knew the rules. Do your work, stay quiet, sticker earned. But deep down, it was never about behavior. It was about pride. That moment when a tiny square of shiny adhesive told you, hey, you did good. No trophy, no medal, just a sticker, and it was everything. There was something electric in the air when your teacher wheeled in the classroom radio and said, "We're listening to a NASA broadcast today." Everything stopped. No math, no spelling, no worksheets, just ears perked and eyes wide, waiting for voices from space. In the 1970s, this was the closest thing we had to live streaming history. You would hear that scratchy, tinny hum come through the radio speaker, and then the voice of Mission Control or a real astronaut talking from orbit. The room fell quiet. You could hear chairs creak and kids shift, but nobody dared speak. This was bigger than your classroom, bigger than the school. It felt like America itself had paused, just so you could listen. You might not have understood everything they said about telemetry or orbit velocity, but it did not matter. You were part of it. When someone said liftoff, you imagined it. You saw the rockets in your mind. And afterward, you all talked about it like you had been there. It made you dream bigger, made you want to be an astronaut, or at least someone who mattered. That radio, with its plastic knobs and metal antenna, brought space right into the room, and for a few minutes, you were floating with them. The gym climbing rope was the final boss of physical education. It dangled there from the ceiling like some cruel test of strength, taunting every kid in the room. In the 1970s, this rope was legend. You either loved it or dreaded it, but you definitely never forgot it. The floor mats underneath were paper thin. The rope itself was rough, frayed, and smelled like old sweat and wood polish. Climbing it meant using every muscle in your body while the entire class watched you inch upward like a nervous sloth. Some kids zipped to the top like it was nothing. Others barely got off the ground. The gym teacher always shouted, "Use your legs, use your legs." Like that helped. If you reached the ceiling, you got to ring a little bell or just tap the rafter. Victory. You felt like a hero. If you slid down too fast, you got rope burn that stuck around for days. Sometimes the rope twisted as you climbed, spinning you like a chicken on a rotisserie. Still, we tried. Every single time. Because climbing that rope meant something. It meant you were strong, brave, capable. Even if it ripped up your hands or left you sore for a week, you went home feeling 10 feet tall. If terror had a sound in elementary school, it was that fire drill air horn. It came without warning, one deafening burst that sent books flying and kids jumping out of their seats like popcorn. In the 1970s, fire drills were not polite little chimes. They were loud, harsh, impossible to ignore. Teachers would scramble to line you up, shouting over the noise while someone grabbed the emergency folder from the wall. You stood in single file, sometimes still clutching your pencil or worksheet, marching outside like tiny soldiers with confused faces. It did not matter how many times you practiced. It always felt a little too real. Some kids made jokes, others looked worried. Everyone counted heads. The teacher would click off names with a pen on a clipboard while the horn kept blaring behind you. And then came the all clear. Back inside. Just like that, the world reset. But that noise stayed in your bones. There was something about those old school air horns that made the drill feel important, like it mattered. Like maybe, just maybe, you were learning how to save your own life. And weirdly, that always stuck with you. Before graphic folders and plastic sleeves, you had brown paper bag book covers. Your mom might have made them for you, folding grocery bags with military precision and taping the flaps down tight. Or maybe you did it yourself, badly, ending up with crooked corners and tears before week 2. In the 1970s, this was just part of school life. Your textbooks came with rules. No writing in them, no bent pages, and definitely no torn covers. So everyone wrapped them. Then came the best part. Decorating. You drew bubble letters, band logos, rainbows, or hearts with your crush's initials. Some kids went all out with colored pens and stickers. Others kept it simple. It was more than protection. It was personal. Your book cover became a walking billboard for your personality. You carried that thing everywhere: math, science, social studies. And when the teacher said, "Take out your textbook," there it was, wrapped, taped, drawn on, and uniquely yours. Sometimes it ripped halfway through the year. Sometimes it lasted till June. But no matter what, the act of covering your book felt like a quiet ritual. Something ordinary that made you feel a little more in control. This was the treasure chest of your desk. Pencil boxes with slide lids were everywhere in the 1970s. Plastic, wooden, or sometimes metal with a satisfying click when you opened them. Inside, magic. A handful of number 2 pencils, a pink eraser worn to the nub, maybe a tiny ruler, a couple crayons, and if you were lucky, a pencil sharpener the size of a thimble. You guarded that box like your life depended on it. It was your supply stash, your emergency kit, your private kingdom. The sliding lid made a perfect fidget toy during boring lessons. Some had names carved into them. Others had stickers or peeling paint. It slid open with a satisfying shh sound, and you always knew where everything was, even if your desk was chaos. Trading erasers or showing off your sparkly pencil became its own kind of currency. And if someone borrowed something and didn't return it, you remembered. For life. That box was small, but it was powerful. It held everything you needed to survive a school day. And when you slid it open, you were ready for anything, except maybe a pop quiz. Back when playgrounds had more dirt than rubber mats, kids played jacks and marbles like it was an Olympic sport. Recess was your window of freedom in the 1970s, and all you needed was a small drawstring bag of marbles or a tin of jacks and a rubber ball. You sat cross-legged on the concrete, eyes locked in, hands steady. Bounce, scoop, catch. That was the rhythm. You started with onesies, then moved to twosies, all the way up to the impossible tensies. Marbles had their own code. You traded them, battled with them, and gave them ridiculous names. Cat's eyes, shooters, steelies. The good ones never left your pocket. There were rules, sure, but most of it was made up as you went. Some days you lost everything. Other days you walked off like a champion with your pockets full. These games taught more than coordination. They taught fairness, strategy, and a little bit of heartbreak. And they never required batteries. Just gravity, skill, and a surface to play on. Kids today might not know the thrill of hearing that tiny ball bounce or watching your favorite marble knock an opponent's clean out of the ring. But we remember. You never cheered out loud, but deep inside you were screaming when the teacher wheeled in the film projector. This was not just another lesson. This was movie day. And in the 1970s, it meant a real film reel with clattering sounds, flickering frames, and a screen that always sagged a little. The lights dimmed, the reel spun, and everyone leaned back. Even the kids who never paid attention suddenly looked up. The movies were scratchy, low quality, and often hilariously dated, even then. But you loved them. Some were cartoons. Others had stiff actors pretending to explain the water cycle or basic arithmetic. Every film had that same narrator voice, slow, serious, and just hypnotic enough to keep you awake. Sometimes the film broke, sometimes it melted, and sometimes the teacher could not get it to focus at all. But nobody cared. It was not about the content. It was the break, the atmosphere, the sense that for once, the classroom felt like a movie theater. And when the lights came back on, your eyes adjusted slowly, and your brain, just maybe, had learned something without even realizing it. The hallway before class was always buzzing. But tucked in every corridor or back corner of your classroom was a row of coat hooks and cubbies, tiny storage spaces that somehow held your whole world. Your puffy jacket, your metal lunchbox, your gym shoes in a brown paper bag, all jammed in together like puzzle pieces. In the 1970s, lockers were not for everyone. A simple hook and a wooden cubby did the trick. You recognized your space without needing a name tag. Maybe it was the one under the fire escape poster. Maybe it still had a sticker from the kid who used it last year. It smelled like wet wool, pencil shavings, and peanut butter. And when you bent down to grab your stuff, you felt safe, hidden, like you had a tiny piece of real estate in the school. You started and ended every day there, drop off, pick up, a small routine that bookended everything. If someone else took your spot, you noticed. Because that hook and cubby were yours, even if they belonged to everyone. You may not have had a paycheck, but in the 1970s classroom, you definitely had a job. The classroom jobs chart was a rotating system of responsibility and prestige. Line leader, door holder, chalkboard cleaner, paper passer. Oh yeah, these were roles you fought for. The chart hung proudly by the blackboard, usually hand-drawn by the teacher with construction paper and colorful pushpins. Everyone got their turn. And when it was your week, you took it seriously. Carrying the attendance sheet to the office felt like a government mission. Holding the door made you feel like royalty. Cleaning the chalkboard? That was sacred. You got to use the eraser, maybe even the spray bottle. These tiny jobs taught you accountability, teamwork, and how to enjoy being part of something. Some kids tried to trade duties. Others just hoped their name would finally land on Messenger. Even the slackers perked up when the jobs chart got updated. Because it was more than chores, it was belonging. It made the classroom feel like its own little world. And in that world, everyone had a part to play. A tall, color-coded box in the corner of the classroom might not look like much, but if you were in school during the 1970s, the SRA Reading Lab was a beast. Self-paced reading cards, divided by color, skill level, and challenge. Each card had a story or article on one side and questions on the back. You picked your level. You read quietly. You answered questions in a notebook or bubble sheet and hoped you did well enough to move up to the next color. The gold level? That was elite. These labs made reading feel like a solo adventure game. No group pressure, no teacher looking over your shoulder. Just you, the card, and the thrill of leveling up. The box had hundreds of cards, and you always wondered if anyone had actually finished them all. Some kids skipped around, others stayed in blue forever. But everyone participated, because it felt like progress. like you were taking control of your own learning. And honestly, the reading material was pretty great. Stories about animals, mysteries, travel, history, stuff that stuck with you. SRA labs were like hidden libraries, tucked inside a plastic tower, and we missed them more than we thought we would. Before backpacks were stitched with mesh, logos, and headphone ports, you had a cloth book bag. Plain, simple, sometimes handmade, and always dependable. These soft-sided carry-alls were what got you through the week in the 1970s. Some were canvas with thick drawstrings. Others were patchwork, sewn by your mom or your grandma, with colorful fabric and uneven stitching that made them one of a kind. They did not have compartments. They did not have padding. What they had was character. You stuffed your books, folders, maybe a crumpled note from the principal's office, and hauled it all home with one arm dangling or slung over your shoulder like a real pro. Sometimes the strap broke. Sometimes you fixed it with a safety pin or a little sewing kit from home. These bags weren't bought to make a statement. They were there to do a job, and they did it well. A lot of times you could tell which book bag belonged to which kid without even seeing their face. The one with patches all over it? That was Amy's. The one stained with grape juice and highlighter? Definitely Bobby's. They were silent companions, sitting under your desk, getting kicked during math, or tossed onto the coat hook when the bell rang. You never thought twice about them. But they were there, every day. Carried your homework, your doodles, your growing little world. Looking back, it's wild how much of your life could fit inside something so small and so soft. Before every classroom had built-in shelves or fancy reading corners, there were milk crates, big, boxy, plastic bins, stacked, lined up, maybe even zip-tied together, and absolutely packed with books. They were usually borrowed from actual milk deliveries or just found behind the cafeteria. In the 1970s, this was normal. This was resourceful. And this was beautiful. Teachers would set them in corners of the room, sometimes with pillows nearby, calling it the reading nook or the book den. Inside those crates were well-worn paperbacks, library rejects with stamps and yellowed pages, and picture books that had been taped back together more times than you could count. You never judged the book by its cover, mostly because the cover was probably missing. But you still read. Everyone did. You would grab a book during free time or rainy day recess, flipping through stories about animals, time travelers, mystery-solving kids, or dinosaurs. Some books smelled like basement. Others were missing entire chapters. But no one complained. Those milk crate bins made books feel casual, accessible, like you could just sit on the floor and disappear for 20 minutes. And sometimes the teacher would change up the crates, rotate them, restock them, or even ask for donations from parents. You might bring in an old book from home and see someone else reading it the next day. That felt good. These crates weren't elegant. They weren't even comfortable. But they worked. They were the scrappy heart of the classroom library, and we loved every lopsided, dusty moment with them. Some classrooms in the 1970s were strict and bare, but others? Total time capsules of the counterculture. We are talking about peace signs, rainbows, hanging macrame plants, and bean bags in the reading corner. If your teacher had long hair and wore clogs, you knew you were in for something different. Posters on the wall quoted Gandhi or John Lennon. Murals were hand-painted by students. Instead of just the alphabet, you might see phrases like, "You are loved" or "Grow your mind." This was not just decor. It was philosophy. Your classroom smelled faintly of construction paper and incense. Instead of desks in rows, you might have small tables or even floor cushions. Some teachers played acoustic guitar during story time. Others had you meditate before a quiz. It was weird, sure, but also warm. These classrooms had soul. You felt it when you walked in. The bulletin boards had soft felt backdrops, decorated with hand-cut paper butterflies, sunflowers, or little peace doves made from tissue paper. You might have learned math with songs, or had group discussions sitting in circles instead of raising your hand from behind a desk. There was something experimental, a little chaotic, but very alive about it. Not every classroom looked like that, but when it did, it stuck with you. It made school feel less like a machine and more like a place where people cared about how you felt. That vibe is hard to replicate, and even harder to forget. Walk into any classroom in the 1970s, and before you even sat down, your eyes were already scanning the bulletin boards, not just for announcements or student artwork, but for those scalloped borders that framed everything like a ribbon around a present. Red, blue, green, maybe even glittery gold if your teacher was feeling bold. These borders were humble but mighty. They turned a plain corkboard into something special. Every month they changed. October brought orange pumpkins, February meant hearts, April, rainbows and umbrellas. The themes followed the seasons, the holidays, the mood of the classroom. Even if the posters inside were crooked, the border pulled it all together. Teachers took pride in choosing them. Some cut their own from long strips of construction paper. Others ordered them from catalogs with names like Happy Hedgehogs or Springtime Stars. You could almost hear the stapler click as they put them up, smoothing each edge like a perfectionist with a mission. Sometimes the border would start to peel off near the end of the month. The corners would curl. A student might pick at it absent-mindedly while lining up. But it stayed up, always. Because it mattered. It made the space feel cared for. When you saw a new border, it felt like the classroom had changed outfits. A small visual cue that said, "Something fresh is starting." We never said it out loud, but we all noticed. And we missed that tiny little pop of pride that made even the walls feel like they were smiling. Before calculators became pocket-sized, before digital anything was a classroom norm, there was the slide rule. A long, flat stick with numbers, lines, and a clear sliding cursor in the middle. It looked more like something a machinist would use than a fifth grader, but if you knew how to work one, you were basically a wizard. In the 1970s, slide rules were still hanging on in math classrooms, especially if your teacher had been around a while. They would whip one out to show how to multiply large numbers, figure out square roots, or calculate ratios. No buttons, no batteries, just pure mechanical logic. You would watch in awe as the teacher slid the clear runner across the scales, muttering numbers under their breath like they were casting a spell. If you were lucky or unlucky, you had to learn to use one yourself. And it was not easy. You squinted. You fumbled. You tried to line things up and hoped the answer made sense. Even if you hated it, there was something cool about it. Like holding a piece of the past. Or like solving math with a tool that felt half science, half art. Eventually, the slide rule faded away, replaced by plastic calculators with big rubber buttons. But the memory of it stayed. Long, clunky, strange, and strangely elegant, it symbolized a time when math was tactile, and the tools in your hand were just as important as the numbers in your head. Trapper Keepers were not just school supplies, they were status symbols. With their Velcro flaps and glossy, over-the-top covers, they turned every classroom into a silent competition of who had the coolest binder. Some featured racing cars. Others showed rainbows, unicorns, or abstract laser patterns straight out of a sci-fi fever dream. Inside, everything was neatly organized. Folders, dividers, loose-leaf paper, and secret notes passed during math class. The Velcro made a loud rip every time you opened it, an announcement that learning was about to begin, or at least be attempted. Trapper Keepers made you feel like you had your life together, even if your grades said otherwise. Teachers had a love-hate relationship with them. They were bulky, distracting, but undeniably effective at keeping your stuff in one place. And if you had one with a matching pencil case, you were royalty. Years later, people still remember the smell of the plastic, the feel of flipping through those laminated folders, and the thrill of sliding in a new pack of notebook paper. Trapper Keepers were not just for school, they were for showing off, staying organized, and feeling like you had a little piece of the future in your backpack. Shrinky Dinks were magic in plastic form. You started with a sheet, clear, flexible, and begging to be colored. You grabbed your markers, drew a wild design, cut it out with safety scissors, and popped it in the oven. What came out was a tiny, hardened version of your masterpiece, often warped but always perfect. Watching it shrink behind the oven door was part of the thrill. You would kneel on the floor, peering through the glass, and gasp as your drawing curled, twisted, and finally flattened. Kids made keychains, jewelry, ornaments. Whatever their imagination allowed, it felt like crafting with sorcery. One minute you were tracing cartoons or making friendship tags. The next you held a miniaturized relic in your palm. The smell of melting plastic filled the kitchen. Parents worried, but no one stopped us. Shrinky Dinks were affordable, creative, and wildly popular at every sleepover and birthday party. You could even buy branded kits, superheroes, cartoon characters, holiday themes. But the best ones were always your originals. There was something deeply satisfying about seeing your art transformed like that. Tiny, tough, and totally unique. We never questioned the process. We just knew it felt like creating something real, something small that still felt huge. Back in the 70s, recess was not guaranteed. It was a privilege, one that could be taken away at any moment. Forgot your homework? No recess? Talked in class? No recess. Got a bad grade? You already know. Teachers used recess as a bargaining chip, a consequence, a way to keep kids in line. But here's the thing. Recess was more than just playtime. It was a break, a breath, a chance to move, laugh, and be yourself for 20 minutes. Taking it away meant bottling everything up, and for some kids it meant another hour trapped in a room that already felt like a prison. Today, we know that recess is essential for health, for learning, for emotional regulation. But back then, it was the first thing teachers removed. No questions, no reflection. Just sit at your desk while the other kids run free. That kind of punishment teaches more than obedience. It teaches shame and a quiet kind of loneliness that can follow you well beyond the schoolyard. Before you could run to the freezer aisle for a rainbow box of treats, there was Mom's kitchen. And in that kitchen were Tupperware popsicle molds, pastel-colored, slightly sticky, and always in the bottom drawer. You filled them with orange juice, Kool-Aid, or whatever soda was left over. Then you popped on the plastic stick tops, placed them in the freezer, and waited. The waiting was the hardest part. You checked every 10 minutes, you tapped the sides, you asked Mom if they were ready yet. And finally, when they were frozen solid, you ran to the counter and twisted. Sometimes they slid right out. Sometimes you had to run them under warm water for what felt like forever. But the result was always worth it. Homemade popsicles, cold, sweet, and uneven. One might be syrupy, another mostly ice. You never knew, but it was yours. Made by you. That tiny sense of accomplishment melted faster than the treat itself. Sticky fingers, drips down your arm. A moment of pride on a hot afternoon. Tupperware popsicle molds were not flashy, but they were practical, nostalgic, and endlessly fun. Long before popsicles came in plastic wrappers with cartoon mascots, this was the taste of summer at home. Scratch and sniff stickers made notebooks smell like fruit salad or something pretending to be. Grape, banana, pizza, popcorn, if it existed, there was probably a sticker that gave off a chemical approximation of it. These tiny scented rewards were currency on the playground. You earned them from teachers, you traded them with friends. You collected them in sticker books and flipped through your favorites like a sommelier of glue and artificial scent. Some smelled better than others. Some were so strong they made your eyes water. Others lost their smell after a few scratches but were kept anyway, honored like faded trophies. You knew the popular ones, root beer, bubble gum, and anything with glitter. You also knew the duds, like liverwurst or mystery meat, that somehow ended up in your binder anyway. Scratching a sticker in class was a quiet act of rebellion. You were not supposed to, but you did. And then you passed the notebook around so others could sniff and nod in approval, or gag in horror. Scratch and sniff stickers were low-tech fun with high nostalgic value. They turned paper into treasure. And even today, one whiff of fake strawberry is enough to transport you straight back to third grade with a smile. Back in the 1970s, it was not uncommon for teachers to start the day with a hymn. Some played records, others sang with the class. Christian songs about grace, God, or salvation echoed through public school classrooms without question. It was part of the morning routine, right after the Pledge of Allegiance, and nobody seemed to think twice. It did not matter if you were not Christian, Jewish, Muslim, atheist, you were expected to sing along. Teachers believed it built character, morality, patriotism. But for many students, it felt isolating, like school was only built for one kind of family. Parents rarely pushed back, fearing they would be labeled difficult, and schools defended it as tradition. Today, religious instruction in public schools is a legal red flag. Courts have ruled against it repeatedly, but back then, it was standard. And if you stayed silent during the hymn, you stood out. You were marked. Some students felt proud, others felt erased. Either way, it was a clear message. This classroom had a faith, and if yours did not match, you were on your own. The kitchen of the 1970s did not just serve food, it made a statement. And that statement was harvest gold and avocado green. These two colors dominated every American kitchen appliance. Your refrigerator, your stove, even your blender wore these colors like a uniform. It was not just paint, it was identity. These colors were supposed to represent nature, health, and a touch of luxury. Harvest gold had a warm golden glow that felt like sunlight. Avocado green was earthy and bold, a perfect match for the indoor plant movement and natural fiber craze of the time. But somewhere along the way, the trend turned into a punchline. Yet, for those who lived it, there is no forgetting. You remember the heavy click of the fridge door, the way the green surface reflected your face in the oven window, the hum of the blender making root beer floats. These were not sleek or modern. They were sturdy, reliable, and filled with the smells of Sunday dinners and burnt toast. Maybe you were not fond of these colors as a kid. Maybe you even hated them. But when you see them now, something deep inside stirs. They are more than colors. They are the palette of your childhood. Leg warmers were a fashion miracle, pointless and perfect all at once. Originally designed for dancers to keep their muscles warm, they jumped out of the studio and into the mainstream thanks to aerobics videos and pop culture icons. Suddenly, everyone was wearing them, over tights, over jeans, even over bare legs. They came in neon, in stripes, in fluffy pastels. Some matched outfits, others clashed proudly. And they served no actual purpose unless you were stretching at a bar or leaping across a dance floor. But no one cared. Leg warmers made you feel like you were part of something glamorous and athletic, even if the closest you got to working out was lifting a hairbrush to lip sync in the mirror. Schools were filled with rows of students rocking scrunched-up fabric around their shins. Some slouched them just above the ankle. Others pulled them high like woolly socks from the future. They were soft, they were cozy, and they were everywhere. Looking back, they might seem silly, but they were fun, expressive, and totally 1980s. And for a few years, they made everyone feel like a star in their own low-budget dance movie. In the 1970s, getting a TV signal felt like summoning the spirits. You did not just turn on the television and sit back, you had to work for it. That meant rabbit ears. That meant stretching, adjusting, and holding metal rods in every direction. And when the fuzz would not go away, there was only one solution: tinfoil. It crinkled, it sparkled, and somehow it worked. Wrapped like a desperate science experiment, your television antenna became a sculpture of hope and frustration. You might remember your sibling being the designated antenna holder, standing on one leg, arm raised, frozen in place while the rest of the family watched. It was trial and error, comedy, and chaos. The goal? A clear picture, even if it only lasted 5 minutes. There were always threats not to move, begging someone not to breathe too hard, cheering when the static cleared, booing when it came back. It was not just about the picture, it was about the ritual, the teamwork, the sacrifice. You learned patience, you learned creativity. You learned that a ball of tinfoil could mean the difference between watching your favorite show or sitting in silence. It was frustrating, ridiculous, and completely unforgettable. It was not about checking if you understood the material. It was not even about teaching. Pop quizzes in the 1970s were often used as punishment. If the class talked too much, misbehaved, or failed to impress the teacher that day, out came the surprise quiz. No study guide, no prep. Just 5 or 10 crushing questions scribbled on the board, with the kind of smug satisfaction only a frustrated adult could wear. These quizzes were not random. They were retaliatory. Teachers handed them out to teach respect or put the class in its place. Students panicked. Some whispered in confusion. Others stared blankly, and a few just gave up halfway through. You were not learning anything. You were being reminded who had the power. And if your grade tanked because of it, too bad. One bad quiz could throw off your whole average. And for some kids, especially those already struggling, it meant a spiral of anxiety that never really ended. Today, the idea of using assessment as punishment would raise serious red flags. Educators are trained to separate discipline from evaluation. But in the 70s, it was fair game. You misbehave, you pay for it. With your grade, your confidence, and your weekend when your parents saw the score. And teachers rarely saw the harm. They thought they were setting a standard. But all they were doing was building fear into the very foundation of learning. Giant scrunchies were not just hair ties, they were statements. Big, bold, and often made of velvet or shiny satin, they wrapped around ponytails like fabric donuts. One was never enough. Some girls stacked them. Others coordinated them with earrings, shirts, or shoelaces. You might even wear one on your wrist, just in case your hair needed managing at a moment's notice. They came in every color of the rainbow and every pattern imaginable. Leopard print? Check. Neon green? Of course. Polka dots the size of your thumb? Why not? Scrunchies were soft, gentle on your hair, and perfect for the sky-high ponytails the 1980s demanded. Some had sequins, some had bows. All of them made your hair look like it was ready to host a party. You could spot a scrunchie from across the school cafeteria. It bounced when you walked and made even the messiest bun look intentional. Looking back, they seem oversized and silly, but that was the point. Scrunchies were playful, practical, and loud in the best possible way. And even though they disappeared for a while, anyone who wore one back then knows, you never really outgrow the joy of tossing your hair into a cloud of fabric. Long before music was digital, it spun on plastic. Record players with built-in speakers were the backbone of every teenager's room and every family living room. They were bulky, boxy, and usually brown or beige. But when you placed that needle on the groove, the room changed. You might remember hearing the Jackson 5, the Carpenters, or Fleetwood Mac for the very first time through one of these machines. The sound was warm, slightly fuzzy, and crackled at the edges, but it was alive. Kids would stack their 45s, adjust the tone arm, and lower the needle with care. These were not sleek devices. They were furniture. Some had lids that closed like a suitcase. Others had knobs you had to gently coax into the right spot. Volume? Not much. But intimacy? All the way. You sat close to it. You knew every skip and scratch on your favorite record. You could play the same song 10 times in a row and it felt new every time. It was not about convenience, it was about connection. The record player was not background noise, it was the centerpiece of your downtime. Hearing one today might just make you stop, listen, and remember who you were when that song first played. Take a field trip in the 1970s, and you were bound to see at least one teacher smoking in plain sight. Maybe it was on the bus ride over. Maybe it was during lunch at a picnic table. Sometimes it was even in the middle of the zoo. A cigarette in one hand, field trip notes in the other. The line between off-duty and in charge was blurry. Teachers thought of it as their break time, but the students were still there, watching, breathing it in. Teachers lit up in front of kindergartners without thinking twice. They did not step away. They did not wait. They smoked in full view. Because back then, that was not seen as harmful. It was normal, expected even. What it really showed was a double standard. Teachers were allowed to unwind while students had no choice but to inhale it. No permission, no escape. And for some kids, that smell still brings back headaches, not nostalgia. It is strange to think about now, an adult in charge of kids doing something that would get you fired today. Smoking near children now is a public health violation, but in the 70s, it was no big deal. Some kids thought it looked cool, others got headaches, but no one ever said a word, because when you are on a school trip, your teacher is the authority. And if they are smoking right next to you, you just hold your breath and keep walking. Acid wash jeans were loud before you even opened your mouth. With their blotchy patterns and faded splotches, they looked like someone had taken a bleach bottle to denim, and somehow that became cool. These jeans were rebellious, messy, and unmistakably 1980s. Everyone had a pair. Some wore them tight-rolled at the ankle, others let them drape over high-top sneakers. Acid wash showed up in jackets, skirts, and full matching sets that turned entire outfits into walking eye strain. You could not blend in wearing acid wash. You stood out, and that was the point. It was denim with attitude. Rough, bold, a little chaotic. Parents hated it. Teachers rolled their eyes. But teens embraced the weirdness. It felt edgy, like you were wearing the uniform of a generation that refused to dress quietly. Old photographs now show groups of kids lined up in front of lockers, each one looking like they had just emerged from a bleach accident and loving it. Acid wash was not timeless, it was not flattering, but it was unforgettable. And in a decade known for excess, it fit right in. Even now, pulling on an old pair brings back the noise, the neon, and the thrill of breaking the fashion rules. Pop beads were not just a craft, they were a lifestyle. These chunky, colorful plastic beads snapped together with a satisfying click, turning into necklaces, bracelets, tiaras, or anything else your imagination dreamed up. Every little girl had a box of them. Every slumber party included at least one fashion show. But pop beads were more than accessories. They were building blocks. They were puzzles. They were surprisingly strong and endlessly versatile. You could pull them apart to start over or wear your creation all day like it was made of gold. They came in every color of the rainbow. Some were clear, some were glittery, some looked like tiny candies. And yes, sometimes you chewed on them even though you were not supposed to. Sometimes they turned into weapons, flicked across the room or used to bind your younger sibling. That was half the fun. Pop beads were part toy, part rebellion. They made you feel creative, independent, grown up even, until one popped off and vanished under the couch, never to be seen again. You always lost one, but the set never felt incomplete. You just made a shorter necklace. Pop beads were a rite of passage in childhood, bright, noisy, and totally unforgettable. Teachers in the 1970s were known to have sharp tongues, and they used them. Swearing in the classroom was not always punished. In some schools, it was the teacher doing the cursing. Kids were called names, lazy, stupid, useless. It was all part of what teachers thought was toughening you up. Some called it military style, others called it keeping control. But what it really was cruelty dressed up as discipline. When a teacher mocked you in front of everyone, you laughed along just to survive it. There were teachers who picked favorites and students who were never given a break. They thought harshness was motivating, but it left kids carrying invisible wounds. When your teacher humiliates you, it stops being about learning. It becomes survival. If you were struggling, they did not help. They joked. They rolled their eyes. They said you would never amount to anything. It stuck. That kind of shame burrows deep. Today, teachers are trained to be trauma-informed. Emotional safety is part of the job. But back then, ridicule was standard operating procedure. It did not matter how much it hurt. Because in their eyes, you were not a kid with feelings. You were a student who needed to shape up. For some people, those words became fuel. For others, they became wounds. Either way, they never left. Slap bracelets were the toy that hit your wrist and hit peak popularity, almost overnight. They were simple. A metal strip wrapped in colorful fabric that snapped around your arm with one satisfying motion. One moment it was straight, the next it curled tight, clinging to your wrist like a coiled snake. Every kid had one. Some had dozens, trading them like currency during recess. They came in neon colors, animal prints, sparkles, and cartoon characters. The louder the snap, the better. Some kids got so good they could slap them onto their arms without looking. But with popularity came problems. Schools started banning them. Parents worried about the metal underneath. Rumors flew about kids cutting themselves open with a rogue bracelet that had been peeled apart. That only made them cooler. Everyone wanted the forbidden accessory. Teachers tried to confiscate them, but they always found their way back into backpacks and onto arms. Slap bracelets were fun, fast, and a little dangerous, just enough to feel rebellious. They were not just toys. They were fashion statements, fidget tools, and tiny thrills rolled into one. And even now, the sound of that sharp snap is enough to take you right back to 4th grade. If you remember clacker toys, you probably also remember getting smacked in the face. These were 2 solid acrylic balls connected by a string, meant to be swung up and down until they clacked together above and below your hand. That was the whole toy. No batteries, no screen. Just 2 hard spheres ready to leave a bruise. And kids loved them. The louder and faster they clacked, the cooler you were. It was a skill to master. Get the rhythm right, and you could keep them going for minutes. Get it wrong, and you got a nasty surprise. Parents hated them. Teachers banned them. Hospitals probably kept a few on hand just to demonstrate what not to do. They were loud, dangerous, and oddly satisfying. For a few wild years, clackers were everywhere, on sidewalks, in classrooms, and hidden under beds when they got taken away. Eventually, safety concerns shut them down, but not before a generation got their fill of noise and near misses. They were outlawed in some places, but that only made them cooler. If you ever got them moving just right, you remember the thrill, and maybe a headache to go with it. They were chaos in toy form, and we would not have had it any other way. Imagine lining up in gym class, waiting to be weighed in front of everyone. The teacher reads your number out loud. Sometimes they even write it on the board. That was health class in the 1970s. Public weigh-ins were routine. Students took off their shoes, stood on the scale, and hoped no one would laugh. But someone always did. Teachers said it was for your health. They did not consider how it felt. The shame, the comparisons, the numbers that followed you down the hallway. It was not just about weight, it was about power. Your body became a number, and that number became gossip. For some kids, it planted the first seed of body hatred that would grow for years. If you were heavier, you got jokes. If you were lighter, you were told to eat more. Either way, your body became a public discussion. No one asked how it made you feel. Today, this would be a privacy violation, a Title IX complaint, a viral scandal. Schools now handle health education with sensitivity, or at least they are trying to. But the damage from back then? It is still real. Kids learned to hate their bodies early. Some never unlearned it. And all it took was a scale, a clipboard, and a teacher who never looked up. The Viewmaster was not just a toy. It was a portal. You held it up to your face like binoculars, clicked the lever, and entered a new world. One tiny slide at a time. These were not just pictures. They were 3D windows into places you had never been and shows you loved. Suddenly, Bugs Bunny was popping out at you. You were walking through Disneyland or swimming under the sea. The images were bright, bold, and vivid, especially when the sunlight hit just right. The reels came in paper packets, labeled like treasure maps, each one promising a new adventure. And you kept them all, in shoeboxes, in drawers, maybe scattered across the floor until your mom made you pick them up. The Viewmaster made you feel like a traveler, even if you never left your room. It was quiet entertainment. No batteries, no wires, no screens. Just your imagination and a satisfying click with every slide. The joy was in the anticipation. What will the next picture be? Where will I go next? You could spend hours lost in it. You remember how your arms got tired, but you kept clicking. One more reel. One more journey. Because for those few minutes, the world was just you and the magic inside that plastic viewer. Mall food court hangouts were not about the food, they were about freedom. Teenagers in the 1980s treated the mall like their second home, wandering its air-conditioned halls with nothing but pocket change and big plans to do absolutely nothing. The food court was the epicenter. Tables filled with cliques, couples, and groups of giggling friends stretched out time between slices of greasy pizza and soft pretzels. One soda could last hours, especially when refills were free. You scoped out crushes, eavesdropped on drama, and occasionally made eye contact with someone cool enough to nod back. Parents dropped you off and picked you up hours later, trusting the mall to act like a babysitter with bright lights and security guards. Whether you sat near the arcade or tucked into the corner by Orange Julius, the food court was a social stage. It was loud, it was messy, and it felt like your world. Every weekend brought the same faces, the same greasy trays, and the same comforting rhythm of adolescent independence. No one talked about it like it was special, but for those who grew up there, it was the perfect mix of noise, neon, and growing up in public. If this took you back, tell us your favorite memory, tap like, and subscribe for more forgotten moments.